Are you recording? So we can hear audience questions.
That's good. Wait for Matt to introduce me.
All right, yeah, just aim for the shiny spot right up here.
How are we there?
Good, is it
Leslie?
unmuted?
A little higher.
A little bit. Okay, hold on. I'll go like this.
Oh,
All
there we
right,
go.
thanks. Thanks everyone online and in the room for coming tonight. Ted, our guiding teacher, was supposed to introduce Leslie tonight, but he's feeling a little under the weather. Ted, please chime in if I missed anything. But I'm Matt Stride. I'm a priest in training here at MZMC, and Leslie is going down that path as well. This is our first Way-Seeking Mind talk, so we get to hear Leslie describe her journey. Right now, Leslie is a work leader here at MZMC, but I remember, me and Kate will remember when you first started coming, and you've been nothing but a joyful presence. So I'm looking very forward to hearing your talk. Thanks, Leslie, for giving the talk today. Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Thank you, Matt. Well, talk about expectations. Hi, everybody.
Leslie,
Yeah.
how is your, are you framed?
Yep,
Thank you.
that'll work great. Thank you. Hi, everybody online. So, as Matt said, this is the first Way-Seeking talk, which we're going to be doing. I think, Margaret, you're doing one. And I don't know everybody else that is. So it's basically for us to tell the story of how we got here, our spiritual practice. And anyone that knows me knows I have no trouble talking about myself. So, but I do have trouble doing it in a very organized and formal way. So it'll be interesting to see how this goes. I did do a script. Won't be reading it totally, but there will be a couple times I will. But anyway, so the title of my talk is Choosing a Teacup and Chucking the Map. So I will explain that as I go through the talk. And I had put two quotes on the cover. While it is fine to map out the territory, it is fatal to confuse the two. And that's Ken Wilber, a favorite philosopher of mine. And then I think that the person who originally talked about the map and the territory is this Alfred Korzybski. I don't know, it's one of those names with very few vowels. But he said the map is not the territory. And it's that simple. He was, I believe, a semantics professor. So anyway, that is my title. I did want to say that the title of the talk, Way-Seeking Mind, answered a question or a dilemma that I've been dealing with for probably as long as I've been a way-seeking mind. I always think of it as, you know, what do you say? The spiritual path, spiritual journey. What are some of the other things we say? We're on a conscious quest and all of those things. And none of it seemed right because all of y'all are also on a way-seeking path. And you know it's not like a journey. I mean, you go through things, but it's pretty circular. It's not a straight line. So I'll just start. The trajectory of my spiritual journey has been anything but a straight line. And the teachers that I've learned from along the way are a very eclectic group. Most of them come from books I've read, partly because where I really, where I began my spiritual journey or my way-seeking mind, and then even after that was all the Midwest, first in Oklahoma, and then South Dakota and Iowa. And so most of the teachers I found were all in books. There wasn't a lot of online presence then, and so there wasn't a lot of that. But most of it came from things I read. It wasn't until about 15 years ago that I found a teacher in the flesh. But the one thing that they all had in common is they really emphasized the call to enlightenment, that desire or that aspiration to find something more. Enlightenment has got kind of a bad rap because, you know, enlightenment sounds like it's something that happens and then it's done. And in my experience, that's not the way it is. think it might be that way for some people. So awakening is probably a term that I feel a little bit more comfortable with, but they all emphasize that, those from the very beginning. So when I first kind of began this seeking was probably in my early 20s, or it was in my early 20s, when I came across the book Illusions by Richard Bach. Has anybody read Illusions? A couple, yeah? It's a great book. And I was like 21 or 22. I was still drinking and using. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'm in recovery, alcoholic and drug addict. And I got sober at 23, which is really lucky and really is the formal start, I think, to this journey that I'm on. But I read Illusions when I was still using. And I remember sitting in the bar one night, 3 sheets to the wind, trying to convince my friends what this book was saying and that this is the truth. And I don't remember how they reacted, but I knew that it had landed solidly with me. And I had stayed with that for a long time. It still is an important text to me. If you haven't read it, it's a great short read that's a nice little parable. I was raised Episcopal, which is what people call it, Catholicism without the guilt. And we were holiday attendees. We went on Easter and Christmas, Mother's Day, because my mom is the one who wanted us to go. But I never felt comfortable there. It was stiff and formal, and it just wasn't, all I remember really from it, the church was beautiful, but it was stand up, sit down, kneel, stand up, sit down, and it just drove me crazy as a child and as a young adult. So I never really jumped on that bandwagon. I tried, had a friend who was into one of those mega churches, and that's when that was a pretty new concept. And she invited me along, and I went, and I thought it was pretty cool, but I just couldn't get on that evangelical bus. It just didn't work for me. So what did bring me to being conscious of this was when I got sober in AA. So I got sober because I got sentenced by the judge for a DUI, and I was relieved to find out I wasn't crazy, that I was just an addict and an alcoholic. And I feel really fortunate that I got sober at 23 and was able to, I never relapsed, which is really a gift because that's very atypical. And I really consider it a gift. It's nothing I did, I just was lucky, something flipped. But I started going to that, and I still remember this, the second night, this is when I realized this is where I belong. The second night, I went to a meeting. It was a step meeting, and it was on the 12th step, which is, I typed it out so I wouldn't have to remember it. Having had a spiritual awakening, as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. And I realized that this was a purpose that I would have. My mother had given me a book by Peter Marshall. Does anyone remember who that was? He was a minister, really popular, and he actually had some good stuff. And she gave me this book of sermons, and he talked a lot about purpose. And I remember feeling so lost. And when I heard that on that 12th step, I thought, here is where I can do something. I can make a difference. And it kind of, I guess, awakened the bodhisattva energy in me. It was totally something. And and then I went through all the things, getting married, having kids, went back to school, did all those things. And so my spiritual seeking really kind of went on the back burner, or I like to think of it as a stage. It was off on the wings, It wasn't something that was real present, but it was always there. It would come up, I would think about it. What really kind of made it become more of a conscious drive was when I went back to school, and when I was getting my master's, I found out that my studies really drew me to it, or it drew my studies in that direction. I'm not sure which way it went, but I realized that the things that pulled me the most my degrees are in literature. So the things that pulled me the most were those stories that captured the essence of who we are at a deeper level than just our beings at this, as little human beings struggling along. When I was getting my master's, I had 3 kids, and I was trying to go to school and do all these things, and I went to a therapist at USD because I was struggling. I was struggling in my marriage, I was struggling with the workload, I was struggling with everything. And she gave me a book. She said, I'm a transpersonal psychologist, after we'd met a few times, which I'd never heard of that before. She said, I'm a transpersonal psychologist, meaning she wants to treat not just me in this human form, but outside of the human form, transpersonal, beyond personal. And she gave me a book, and I always feel kind of hokey saying this. She gave me a book on channeling, and it's called Emmanuel's Book. And she said, I don't usually do this, but I really think this is for you. And it was for me. It was, for those of you who've read Illusions, remember the Messiah's Handbook that the reluctant Messiah would read from? I have a tattoo from a quote from that says, give you an idea of the flavor, is argue for your limitations and sure enough they're yours. So it was that sort of little, things that kind of little truth nuggets. And this book was full of them. And it answered questions in it. I mean, as much as I believe anything, I really felt like this gave me some answers that I needed to have. And that kind of pushed me over the edge, I think. I was about 35, and it was just before my 35th birthday. And when I turned 35, I got my first tattoo. Clearly, I have more than 1 or 2. But I got my first tattoo ever, which really irritated my ex-husband, husband at the time. But I didn't care. And I said, it's not about you. It was, I got the watermark, of course it's from a book, the watermark from Illusions, between sections. It was like a leaf or a heart that's on its side. And it was the same watermark that appeared in the Emmanuel's Book. That was one of those things I was like, whoa. But anyway, I got that tattoo. And I got it thinking, I am never going to follow what other people think I should believe from this point forward. Because, raised in this culture, you're kind of driven to believe certain things and to follow the dominant religion and the dominant belief system. And I had been fighting that probably most, that little guilt, that little thing. And so I decided I was done with it. I was finally going to, and I did things like I got copies of Emmanuel's Book and gave it to all my family at Christmas. Here's what I believe. I'm sure they're all like, hey, thanks. But I was making a stand that I was that I was going to follow my heart, that I was going to have a way-seeking mind. So anyway, where am I? Okay, when I went, I was introduced to Joseph Campbell. How many of y'all? Most of y'all probably know Joseph Campbell, right? Yeah, great guy, mythological scholar. Is that right? It sounds like, is he mythological or does he study mythology? He studies mythology. It's kind of mythological too, really. But anyway, I was very drawn to his thinking from The Power of Myth, the PBS series, and I read The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and it changed my life. Because it really is comparative religion. It shows that all of the stories we tell ourselves are all saying the exact same thing. And so I ended up writing my dissertation based on the hero's journey and his idea that we're all heroes and that the hero's journey is a metaphor for the evolution of consciousness. It's the metaphor for waking up, the process of waking up. The call to adventure, the road of trials, and then the return and reintegration after you've learned whatever lesson that was. Well, that really, in a large scale, really seemed to me to speak of our spiritual journeys, our journey to awakening.
What was your discipline?
Literature and creative writing. So, so I chose that, and I was fortunate I was supported, and I actually, I don't know if my time looked like. I've still got lots of time. Okay, so I wanted to read you part of the introduction of what I wrote, because it captures what Joseph Campbell did for me and how it kind of put me on the path. So it's short. Years before I needed to choose an area of literary scholarship, one chose me. As a master's student in American literature and creative writing, during the course of a graduate seminar, I was exposed to mythological scholar Joseph Campbell. The professor showed excerpts from The Power of Myth, Public Broadcasting's television interviews of Campbell. If you haven't seen those, see them, find them. Campbell's discourse on the hero's journey that resonated most emphatically with me, having pursued personal spiritual growth for years and frequently recognizing that same growth in the literary characters I came across, I was fascinated with the concept that myth reflects spiritual growth so clearly in the archetypal pattern of the hero's journey. Furthering my exposure to Campbell, I read his exhaustive study of the heroic journey, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, and began to look more closely for identifying the patterns he delineates in the novels I was reading and the films I was watching. Although I explored other options of study throughout my years of graduate work, I perennially returned to Campbell and his concepts. So that was kind of like a big turning point for me. What happened then is I moved from theory to practice, or from the map to the territory. That's when I started to make the jump. And that happened first with in my coursework. I took a transpersonal psychology class. Coolest class I've ever taken in my life. Had to take a class outside my discipline, and this is the one I chose, and it was absolutely the best thing that ever happened to me. One of the things that we first learned is that religions can be seen, or traditions or practices or whatever we want to call these things that we can follow, come in two flavors. One is transformational, where you practice. In Zen, we practice to wake up. We don't practice to understand the world around us, although we often gain a better understanding. And there are, Christian contemplation is another one of those. Yogic traditions are that way. They aren't translating the world for us. We are meant to transform through our practices. And that's what this class was about. And what he did is he introduced me to Ram Dass, to Ken Wilber. We read some Jung. We read Zen Mind's Beginner's Mind. We read a yoga psychology book. We read Thomas Keating's Intimacy with God, and A Course in Miracles. So he introduced me and all the other people in the class to all this, like, here's the buffet. And part of our assignment was to practice each one. We practiced each one of the disciplines. And it was a wonderful experience, and it gave me a taste for all of these things. One of the things that had held me back is meditation. Meditation, for me, was a difficult thing to really get my head around. I could read everything and tell you, and I knew those maps really well, but to actually get in the territory, to actually sit down on the cushion, I was struggling with that. And I think part of it was because of my early years of using LSD, which I did a lot of. And at one point I had a bad trip, and from that point on I had flashbacks. I quit taking it, but I had flashbacks. And meditating kind of reminded me of that, and it scared me. And so I really had a difficult time allowing myself to drop into any kind of state of consciousness other than the one that my brain is in charge of. So I think that's a lot of it. I tried Jack Kornfield's set of, well, I'm dating myself, set of cassette tapes to listen to. And then living in Elk Point, which is close to Sioux City, Iowa, there was nothing. There was nobody that I could go to for help on this. No teachers. So I looked, and the closest one was in Nebraska. And for any of you that know a little bit about Katagiri and about our Zen Center and about his lineage, the Nebraska Zen Center was run by a priest named Nonan, I think that's how you say it, and he was a student of Katagiri's. So the Nebraska Zen Center is another one of Katagiri's lineage Zen centers. I had no idea, of course, but that was the closest I had. And I went and spent a day there and learned to sit, learned about the mudras, learned to do walking meditation, was acquainted with it. And so I kind of got some early introduction into Zen meditation way before I found the Zen Center. So slowly I became more comfortable with meditating. There was a big turning, let me check my clock. In 2009, there was another big turning point for me. You know, we can look back on our lives and see these points where things start to, where things began to shift. And another one of those was in 2009. I was recently divorced. I was feeling unhappy, lonely, unloved, frumpy, all of these things. And I got through New Year's all alone. My kids were old enough for the first time. They were all gone. My ex-husband, who still spent holidays with his son, he was not there because he had his plans. And I'm in this house all by myself. And I thought, this is awful. And I thought, I do not want to ever experience this again, the feelings that I'm having during that time. And within a few days, I got an email from the Integral Institute. Now, Ken Wilber, I mentioned him, became a really important influence in my life. Really feeds the old intellect. He's a Zen practitioner, but he's really heady in a lot of ways, which I loved. But he also pushes meditation. Anyway, his organization sent out an announcement, and I had been to the Integral Institute, or the Integral conference, Integral Theory Conference. I'd gone to that. I'd been to a transpersonal psychology conference where I had been more exposed, but the email that we got was the Integral Experience Conference, and it was all experiential. It was about, come out here and we're going to be exposed to all these different practices. So I thought, that's how I won't, and it was over New Year's. I thought, I will not spend another New Year's alone. I will spend it in California at Asilomar with like-minded people. So I signed up for it. And also right after that, I started going to the Unitarian Church, which I see as it was a beacon of light in a very black hole of spirituality that was Sioux City, for me. Couldn't find anything, but there I found something. And it wasn't that they had any dogma, but if anyone's familiar with the Unitarian Church, they have 7, now I think it's 8, principles on how to live, and they're very similar. Ted, I thought of when you were reading the new mission statement, they're very similar to that list that you gave about treating others well and being responsible and all those things. So I found that. One of the guys there led a study group of some pretty spiritually out there books. I mean, the one he was teaching was a channeled book. And there I studied Eckhart Tolle, and I studied, I can't remember the name of it, but it was a channeled book. We studied Adyashanti. That was where I first heard the name Adyashanti, and there was a woman who was a part of the group, and she had gone out to one of his retreats. And I said, and she was saying how wonderful it was, and I said, well, where should I start if I want to check this guy out? So she suggested, I think it was Falling into Grace, and I read that, and I thought, oh, okay, this guy, this is it. And I began reading his books. He did a Wednesday night broadcast every month that you could watch. It was a couple hours long usually. He took questions from callers. And I started following him, and I felt like I had found a teacher. As I've learned more about Adya and learned about Zen, I found out he's from the Zen tradition. He isn't a strictly Zen teacher anymore, but he was transmitted in the Zen tradition. And the place he did all of his retreats was the Sonoma Mountain Zen Center, which is very connected to us through Suzuki Roshi. So he's of that same lineage, and probably why I was so drawn to him, and I'm drawn to here. So I had heard of him but the first teacher I met in person was after that Integral Experience Conference. I signed up for a guy, Arjuna Arda, he's another spiritual teacher, and he did awakening coaching training. So I signed up for it to go learn how to be an awakening coach, really to learn how to awaken. And he had some really great processes that gave me little glimmers. I had little insights, little feelings of dropping into something different. And it was in a beautiful place. It was in the Tahoe National Forest. But while I was there, two of the women that that were also there mentioned Byron Katie, the work of Byron Katie. So and all this time, I'm starting to read Adya too. But who knows? Anyone know Byron Katie here? Anyone done the work of Byron Katie? So I guess she's a spiritual teacher. She had a sudden awakening, and she came up with 4 questions and a turnaround. It's a method of inquiry. And she did it with herself for a very long time, and then people started coming to her, and now she is very well known. thework.com, you can download her stuff and watch the things. But it's shadow work is really what it is. It's related to a couple of things. So it's inquiry. So like the Four Noble Truths, that the inquiry questions lead you to the realization that it's not the situation you're in that makes you suffer. It's what you think about the situation, which to me is pretty related to those Four Noble Truths. We have suffering, it's inevitable, but we can, if we change our thinking, we might be able to walk away from some of that suffering. So her work did that. It also, I learned from listening to Tim's talks here, very similar to the tetralemma, because after the inquiry, you do all this turning back on itself. So if your thought is, he shouldn't have done that, then you turn it to, he should have done that. Or, I shouldn't have done that to him. Or, I shouldn't do that to myself. And that's where the magic lies, I think. So it's like the tetralemma. It's like, do you step this way, or this way, or this way, or do you do it both? And it changed my life. I did that for a very long time. I still use that. If I have something that comes up in my life that I'm struggling with, I'll do the work on it. I did it pretty religiously and pretty extensively for quite a long time. And it really helped me, I think, with shadow work. Cleared out a lot of that stuff that I didn't know was there. Because when you do those things, it somehow brings it out. I don't want to go into that. Oh, while I was at an event with Byron Katie, her husband is Stephen Mitchell, who translates a lot of sacred texts. She'd never read one in her life before she had this awakening experience. But since that time, she had met Stephen Mitchell and they had married, and he translates a lot of works. And one of the things that he translated that I think is one of his best translations was the Tao Te Ching. And so I bought a copy of that when I was there at that event, and it stayed with me. I still have it, I read it, it's all dog-eared and torn up and noted and all that stuff. But the Tao really spoke to me, and very much so. And part of the reason it spoke to me, and part of the reason I liked Adyashanti's teaching, is there wasn't a lot of rigmarole. There wasn't a lot of dogma. It was a pretty clean message. If you've read the Tao, you know it's pretty direct. It's just, here's the truth. It does it in a lot of not real direct ways, but the message is very direct. And I found that with Adya, and I have found that here. I find I'm drawn very much to just clean Dharma, not a lot of stories to go with it. Let's see. Okay, so I was out in California. I'd moved out to California, studying with Adya. And he doesn't do one-on-one teaching, but I was very involved in his teachings, taking his classes. I was kind of exploring what I could do out there, and at I went to 4 silent retreats with him. Those are the first retreats I did, and they were residential, Mount Madonna up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and it was gorgeous. And during one of those retreats, I talked to the retreat manager when it was over and said, you know, I would love to work for you guys. And she said, well, very small staff, very little turnover, but send your resume. I did. And the short story is I was hired. The woman, I went out to volunteer, and the woman who was their writer and editor wanted to retire and wasn't going to do it till she found someone to replace her. And she met me and she said, oh, you're the one I want. And so I got that job and I was able to work. So not only was, had my way-seeking mind become much more a part of my life, it started to arrive in every area. It was in my work life. I mean, everything I worked on was about waking up, was Adya's teachings. And the people I worked with were all way-seeking mind people. I often say, so Jack Kornfield, I heard him say once, that it's a great way to start the day to wake up and say, what would love have you do today? And I just love that saying. And it felt like everybody I worked with woke up and thought, what would love have me do today? It was just surrounded in this really beautiful, and it wasn't woo-y, they were very professional and the work was professional. So it was like this perfect thing. And lasted about a year, 6 months out there and then 6 months remote, and then COVID happened about 6 months in. So they ended up laying off half the staff, and then finally Adya has now retired. So I moved back here, and it was a difficult transition for me, very difficult. When I found I was coming back, Mukti, who is Adyashanti's wife and also a teacher, said, why don't you check out those I heard that Sonoma Mountain Zen Center is doing some online meditation and teachings during COVID. Why don't you check that out? And I said, okay. I got the phone, I thought, well, why don't I look and see if there's anything in Minnesota? Well, I found this place, and I went on a Monday night, sat down to do a Monday night meditation, and I think it was only Jeremy or Cato and Matt that were on there.
Monday morning, but if it's Monday night, it's in.
So it was a long time ago.
I think it was in the morning.
Do you?
Yeah,
Whenever it was. I think it was at night.
maybe.
But whatever it was, these 2 guys were there. And when it was over, maybe it was in the morning. Anyway, they, instead of just ending the meeting, they reached out. And they said, hey, we haven't seen you before. And so we visited for maybe 15, 20 minutes, and I felt so welcome. And I thought, okay, maybe that's why I have to go back to the Midwest, is for the next part of this journey or whatever it is that we're on. I didn't come to that easy terms with it for a long time, for a lot of different reasons, but I did come back. And with COVID, I started taking the classes. I did the first practice period. In fact, it was on the Paramitas, and Ben Conley, one of the assistant guiding teacher here, did it. And another tattoo, I got a tattoo of the Paramitas on my arm to remind me of how I want to live my life. And so I'm a joiner. I became very involved right away. As soon as we were meeting in person, it was Margaret, I think, is the first person I ever said, I think I may want to do this priest thing. We were meeting for practice period. Yep. We were practice partners that November. I looked to see, and I said, maybe I want to do this priest thing. And she was like, wow, you're brand new and you want to be a priest. But and it has stayed with me. It has stayed with me. So I met with Tim one-on-one. You can meet with anybody one-on-one for a while, and I think his experience as a psychologist was probably pretty beneficial for me at that time, because I really was struggling with the move and with what had happened. And I took the classes, and started getting really involved. So why Zen? Why was I involved here? I think that Zen is the cleanliness of Zen. I mean, basically Zen is sit and wake up. I mean, you got a lot of rituals that we do that are pretty cool, and there are things we do, but basically it's sit and wake up. That's the whole thing. And all of Aj's talks were about that. They were like, and it was reinforced here, you don't need a teacher to tell you how to wake up. You don't need, I mean, they all are good ways to get there. You don't need books. You don't need videos. What you need to do, finally, is just to sit and wake up. By choosing Zen, it was the first time I called myself a Taoist for a long time because I thought there's no really organization called the Taoist organization, so I can call myself a Taoist because I'm not, you know, I don't want to be in a religion. But when I finally chose Zen, I did something that I think of as choosing my teacup. I was at a Unitarian study group, or it wasn't a study group, but some monks had come in. Some Tibetan Buddhist monks had come in, and I asked, so what if you just like to pull from everything? Because that's who I was. What if you don't want to be a Buddhist or a yogi or a Christian or a whatever? What if you just want to pull? And he said, well, you know, that's good. He said, the tea is all there, but if you don't have a cup to put it in, it's a little harder to hang on to it. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. How am I going to deal with that? So the Taoism was kind of like halfway there. I'm a Taoist if anyone asks. But by coming here and choosing this practice, it's choosing my teacup. So I chose this teacup because it's so meaningful to me. And I'm not trying to do a, you know, public service announcement about how great Zen is. But for me, it was exactly what I needed. It gave me a little bit of structure and not too much dogma. So just sit and wake up, I still read some stuff. We read some great stuff in Zen, whether it's the ancients, you know, or whether it's Dogen, or whether it's someone that wrote some, you know, whether it's Tim's book. We got all sorts of sources, but those aren't the answers. They're pointers, you know, fingers pointing at the moon, but they aren't the thing. The thing is that I believe is to sit and wake up. So I've quit going into those spiritual bookstores looking for the right book that's going to put me in the right place. I mean, how many of us have done that? Find that right book that's going to give us all the answers. So I don't do that anymore. I do read a little bit, and I do that. But this has been great. This has been my path. And now, you know, last year, I made the formal step to accept the Bodhisattva precepts. And that's a way to live that I want to live. And I sewed my rakusu, which I had to run home and get when I first got here. I forgot it, but I remember it most of the time. But sewed this by hand, which was a lot more of an enjoyable experience than I thought it would be. I'm not a sewer, seamstress. I think of this more as sewer. And I got my Dharma name, which is Seizan Gyosho, that Ted gave me, which means Blue Mountain Dawn Bell. So the Blue Mountain part is a reflection of who I am and what I love. I mean, I love the mountains. I spent a lot of time there. And Dawn Bell is aspirational because I'm not a morning person. So I think Ted gave me that to be aspirational. But so I've kind of jumped in with both feet, and I've started my training for ordination, and I will start sewing very soon. Cato is our new sewing teacher, and I'm very excited to sew with him. And I've decided this is what I'm going to do. So I do want to read one last thing before I am done. Let's see if I can find it here. Look at all this stuff I just did by memory. So glad. I don't like reading my stuff, but I'm gonna read this. This is something I wrote. I'm writing a book, as all writers are, that is my own book, but I never write, I never work on it. But there have been times I've worked on it. And I wrote this piece a while back, and I thought it kind of captured what this is for me. I say the trajectory of my spiritual journey has been anything but a straight line, and the teachers I've learned from and followed are an eclectic group. I've been following the yearning for consciousness since I was in my early 20s and stumbled across Richard Bach's book, Illusions. Since that time, I've meditated sporadically and read spiritual texts for guidance, coming back again and again to that glimmer of insight. But, like many of us, I was often sidetracked, distracted, or focused on the day-to-day machinations of operating in this earthly existence of ours. And although I continue to be distracted in all the small moments of day-to-day existence, as I navigate this world that we live in, regular practice has brought me back to center, refocusing my attention on that which is always and already awake and yearns for conscious expression in our existence on this planet in this lifetime. This daily practice, while not a remedy to what Zen calls the monkey mind, or a blocking of the innumerable distractions of daily living, centers me at least once a day for at least a few moments in the silence and reminds me of the reality that underlies the rushing madness of our everyday life. So that's my story. So thank you for listening. And we have a couple minutes if anybody wants to comment.
I'm just gonna make sure there's no echo here so people can.
Okay, thank you.
We're gonna change original sound to. There we go. All right.
Yeah, anyone online or in person?
Online or in person, any comments or? Sure.
You mentioned a short phrase, I think you had a tattoo or something about your limitations or
Argue for your limitations and sure enough, they're yours.
how do you?
I think it's, for me, it's that we set our own limits. That if we don't limit ourselves, if we just enter awakening, the idea of awakening, and don't think, oh, well, I could never do that, or I'm not good enough, or whatever, then I'll be limited by those things. But if I let those thoughts go, it's really about the power of thinking, the power of thought.
That's from that book
Illusions, yep, Richard Bach's, yep. It's from the Messiah's Handbook. So the whole thing of that story is, what if you had a Messiah that came, taught, and got sick of it, left it? I'm not going to teach anymore. So he gets a biplane and flies around the countryside, giving rides for $5 or whatever, and teaching one-on-one in these things. And he runs into Richard Bach, who's also flying an airplane around giving rides. And that's who he teaches. So that was just one of the lessons. Anybody else?
Can I ask you a hard question?
You bet.
So, because, at a certain point that do this, my father says. So, Guy Gibbon, who's a late priest here,
Yeah.
said once that was important not to confuse the effects of meditation with the purpose of meditation.
Mhm.
Do you have any thoughts about that?
I don't know. I mean, if I think about the effects of meditation, I think about how it's brought me to a point that I remember. My effects of meditation are not so much I'm peaceful, the Om part of it, which is part of it, but it's that idea that, oh yeah, I'm going to go home for a few minutes. I'm going to go home for 30 minutes. I'm going to try to go home. I'm going to try to bring myself to what's inside that never changes. And so that's maybe the effect. And then as opposed to the purpose, I guess the purpose is to wake up. I mean, they're related but different. Does that answer your question? Thanks for putting me on the spot.
Well, so, sir, you'll have to do this.
That's true. That's true, but give me a little bit of time. Yeah. Sue show ceremony. Who else? Anybody else?
I have a question.
Well, hi, Jesse. Sure.
Hey, I have a 9-year-old daughter, as you might maybe know. How can you begin to introduce these concepts to a child?
Children's program. One of the women here just said the children's program. We have one here. I think living by, for me, trying to introduce it to my granddaughters. We talk about meditation. Ivy, I'll say, you want to meditate? And she'll run over and sit on my cushion and go. And then she jumps up and runs off. And she's 3.5. So she knows what meditation is. And I just try to practice the precepts, practice loving kindness, practice the things that are the person I want to be, that these precepts bring us to. Does that make sense, Jesse?
I think so. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, Leslie, I just wanted to say thanks for such a wonderful story, and I seen some of this unfold. So I think you were coming to the Tuesday night Dharma talks too. Was when I first got to know you, and so congratulations on moving forward. I just am thrilled that you're doing this, and I can't wait to hear more Dharma talks from you. So congratulations, and it's so great to have you here with us.
Thank you, Donnie. Yes, I remember you always, I loved the fact that we would do that a lot. I mean, I went to these talks a lot online when we were during COVID, and Donnie and I were regulars. I think it was great. Yeah, thank you. Anybody else?
I just want to say thank you, Leslie. Your story it feels very similar to mine. So, and kind of landing in the same place as you. So it's really, I could almost cry. It was really special. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Leslie. And I just look forward to continuing on this path with you.
Me too. So Ted is my teacher, and you sound like you are a little sick.
Oh, maybe a little.
I didn't recognize. I'm like, who's speaking? I didn't realize it was you. Oh, you poor thing. Drink some honey or tea.
Oh, I'm fine, but I'm staying away from Zen Center, so I don't give it to anyone else.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I look forward to working with you too, Ted. He's an awesome teacher. So thank you. Anybody else? We're kind of out of time.
We have time for one more.
One more. Anybody? Yes.
No, I'll just say thank you. Appreciate your candid honesty. It's pretty common to hear kind of sanitized perspectives of other people's experiences or what their views of ultimate reality is. But to have it be more personal and literally true, I think helps it kind of stick a bit more.
Thank you.
Rather than just being kind of something that could be construed as correct versus something that actually happened. is real. You can kind of grasp that easier.
Thank
you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And I thank the Zen Center for doing these. There's going to be 4 of them this year. I'm the first, and that personal story is just, thank you very much. I did sanitize it some because I swear like a sailor. And I did not, did anyone notice I did not swear once? Which
Wow, I didn't know.
I almost wanted to do it just now.
First time for everything.
I know, right? So I am working.
We have 4 more. You're the first of 5.
I'm the first of, we have 4 more, so we have 5. Okay. Every other month, the first Tuesday of the month will be, when are you doing yours, Margaret?
September something.
Okay, so you're the first Tuesday in September. And is there somebody online that's doing it? Judy and Judy, are you both? Judy, you're doing it, aren't you?
Judy.
Yes, in November.
Awesome. And who else? Judy, are you doing one, Judith?
No, but is Deb? No, okay.
Normal talk.
No, it'll be Raymond, 2 Judys,
Oh.
and Margaret.
Okay, Raymond, 2 Judys, and Margaret. So, so Judith, that's why I thought maybe you were the other Judy. Okay.
Well, thank you all for coming. Kato, could you
Yeah.
use the tripod?
Matt's gonna do the announcements and pass the Donna Bowl, which is the first of the
Armida.
Paramitas, which is generosity.
Yes, we appreciate your Donna. We rely on your Donna. MZMC is a donation-based organization now, so all of our programming is offered free of charge. We rely on the generosity of our